Hi, this is Mrs. Krivicic, and I just wanted to talk to you today about ACT science strategies. So, the first strategy is you're going to want to understand that there are three types of passages. There's one that is data representation, and usually on the ACT, there are three passages that fit that category. So, when you're in the ACT science section, there will be three of those subsections that fit under data representation. And data representation generally presents information on a singular topic, but perhaps different viewpoints or different results in their data. So again, when you think of data, you want to think of graphs, tables, charts. And the ACT test, if you don't take anything else away from this video except this, know that the ACT science test is not a comprehension test. It's not about whether or not you know a specific piece of information from biology, chemistry, physics. It really is about whether or not you can interpret graphs and charts. The next category of passages are conflicting viewpoints. And that passage reads a lot like the ACT reading section, where it is a passage. And generally, you have passage 1 and passage 2. And the idea is in the questions, you're trying to decide which viewpoint and understand the different viewpoints that are being presented. And again, it generally describes two different conclusions. And then lastly, your research summaries, they show a series of experiments, and there are three passages of that. So the main strategy for the science section of the ACT is to make a strategy for each type of passage. So again, data representation, you want to understand, how do I look at a chart? How do I look at a graph? How do I look at a table? So if we take charts, for instance, you want to understand, what are the labels on the chart? What is being projected, or what's being represented along horizontally, and what's being represented vertically. So a chart could have a title, it could have a measurement of how something is being measured, it could have, different pieces of information. So you want to understand how to read that specific chart. In terms of a graph, there's a slide coming up that has a graph on it. You want to think back to your physical science class, your biology, your earth science class, or chemistry or physics, or whatever science you're in. And whenever you're in science class, we ask you, did you look at the title? What's the title? What are on the X and Y axis? What are the units of measurement? What are they being measured in? Is it a positive trend? As one variable increases, does the other increase? Or as one variable increase, does the other one decrease? Again, that's what it's referring to when it says trends. So again, you want to understand variables, independent, dependent variable, the units on the graph, and any trends that you might see. The conflicting viewpoint, you will know that is a conflicting viewpoint passage. And again, there's only one of them. There will be no charts, graphs, tables, or anything. It is specifically a reading passage. So for that one, you're going to want to approach it and read the first sentence, the last sentence, skim for important words. First sentence, last sentence, skim for important words. Now, by doing that, I want to acknowledge that you will miss some of it. But hopefully by getting an idea of what viewpoint A has and what viewpoint B has, you'll be able to decide what is being shown. And then your research summaries, that describes one or more experiment. And really, this has a purpose. So the why are they conducting this experiment? What method? And if they go into a lot of detail about the method, you can guarantee that there's probably a question that's going to relate to what method did they use, or how did they collect their data? And again, did they come to the same conclusion, or did they come to a different conclusion? So if we look at the graph below, we want to understand there's a couple things that we can take a look at. First of all, you want to notice that this is a figure. And along the x-axis, we have months. And there's J, F, M, A, M, J, J, A, S, O, N, D. Those are all the months in the year, starting with January, ending in December. So they're measuring something on a yearly basis. And then if we go up, we see that we have Cl with a negative sign. Even if you didn't know what the negative sign is, these are different ions. These are different data is being represented. And we also have the monthly wet deposition. That just means precipitation. So the monthly wet deposition, again, that's how much we have in our rain. So again, you want to look at the numbers along the y-axis. You want to look at what is being shown, and we can see, okay, in February, chlorine decreased, but sulfur SO4 increased. We see that they did not increase and decrease at the same time. So again, you want to notice what's being plotted on the different X and Y axes. Okay, so the next one is if you are doing a conflicting viewpoint, it is important that you summarize viewpoint A and viewpoint B, or viewpoint 1 and viewpoint 2, because they are that is usually the main idea of these passages. You want to summarize the passages with short notes, key phrases. It's not looking for a big sentence, maybe keywords. In science class, a lot of times we have you just highlight the key words inside of the passage. Again, it could be reading the first and last sentence. It could be summarizing the main idea. So if we take this first paragraph, so we could read it. In the fall, monarch butterflies in eastern North America migrate to Mexico, where they overwinter in high altitude forests of Oyamel fir, an evergreen conifer. Now, I don't care that it's a conifer. That while that is important for monarchs, in this setting, it is not as important. So we're talking about the fall, okay? In the fall, monarch butterflies, they migrate to Mexico. So this is probably going to be about where they spend the winter. And so if we hop down to hypothesis 1, I would just read the first sentence. So monarch butterflies require energy from stored lipids for migration and during the overwintering period. Okay, if I keep on reading, the butterflies first store lipids before they begin their migration, and then during migration, as stored lipids are converted to energy, lipid mass continually decreases. When the butterflies reach the overwintering sites, ending their migration, they must store lipids again before beginning the overwintering period. So this says they require energy from stored lipids for migration, and also during the time at which they are staying down in Mexico during the winter. The next hypothesis is monarch butterflies require energy from stored lipids for migration, but not during the overwintering period. If I had just read the first sentence and I had not read the whole passage, I know that those are different hypotheses. One is saying that energy is required in both. One is saying it's just required in the migration period. And then if we look at the last hypothesis, it says monarch butterflies require energy from stored lipids during the overwintering period, but not for migration. So this says during migration, they don't need it. So it's the opposite of hypothesis 2. So you want to see those nuances. You want to see those differences. And again, you could summarize, okay, hypothesis 1, energy in migration and overwintering. Hypothesis 2, energy for migration, not overwintering. Hypothesis 3 is for overwintering, but not for migration. And from there, you could go ahead and start answering the questions that are there. All right, the next strategy is to identify the type of questions that the ACT asks. So within all of these passages, there's going to be different kinds or different types of questions. One is the interpretation of data. We've already kind of talked about that. If it is interpreting data, it's going to ask you to interpret a graph, a table, that kind of thing. The second type is the evaluation of models, inferences, and experimental results. And that means that you're going to make judgments about theories, data, and other scientific information. And then lastly, scientific investigation. That's going to, can you understand the reasons or the why behind the experimental setup? So with the interpretation of data, again, sometimes it's best not to read the text, but go straight to the questions and then try to answer the questions by only looking at the graphs and table. So if we look at this as an example, and I know it's blurry, we can see that there's some sort of bird here and they've labeled beak depth. So if I was just looking at this and didn't, know what they were talking about, I'd say it's probably about a bird and probably about how big the beak is. So then I would go and I would say, okay, well, we would look at the figures. So this one says present of captured finches. So it looks like we're looking at finches and we're looking at the depth or the size of their beak. Then I would go ahead and I would answer questions off of these two, this graph and this diagram. Again, I'm not too concerned about the different studies. And then the last strategy is to practice the timing of the ACT. Now, when you take the ACT, you only have 5 minutes per passage. And if you feel like you cannot complete this, you may want to practice completing only 5 passages. So if you're able to get a hold of an ACT Science, and I actually have sample ACT Science passages in my room, but you could give yourself, okay, I'm going to set myself 7 minutes for 5 passages. If you can succeed at those 5 passages, your score will still be relatively high. And again, practicing is probably the best thing that you can do. Practice looking at graphs, practice looking at charts, practice answering questions that are based on data. And again, you're trying to shoot for that 5 minutes per passage. And some online resources to give you more tips and tricks. Kaplan, if you type in Kaplan into Google, you'll find lots of strategies, more than the ones that I went over in this video. Actually, the link is right here. And then the ACT website itself can give you sample problems to work through. So hopefully this was helpful. Take care. Goodbye.